Recording in progress.
When you begin, people usually come in alone.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Hello. So let's take our seats. Hope you guys had a coffee already, and we can get started. Yeah, please sit next to. Hello.
Is it on?
Yeah.
So I've been in contact with Wednesday, quite a bit. I also met them in Rome.
Hello. Hello.
Also, you have a coffee
I'm working.
container, and then
Hello.
I also spoke to
Hello. Hello.
sorry to I forgot your name.
Let me just use the microphone while it is so. Yeah, thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Uh, Hope you guys have a good night of sleep. I don't know about you, but it has been a quite intense already a few days. For the ones who are staying 2 weeks here, I really, yeah, I feel proud of you because it must be difficult to stay that long. So I'm Felipe. I'm from Brazil. And I'm really happy that you all came to this panel today. I am the founder of Free Nature, which is a Dutch organization, Dutch-Brazilian organization working on supporting farmers and corporates in the transition, but also scaling regenerative agriculture. And, um, and basically, we're mostly working in the global south, so Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, supporting farmers transition and scaling. So basically, we as Renature really want to empower farmers and listen to them and enhance soil health. And we believe that this Food Systems Pavilion is all about that. So that's why we thought of like combining forces with Katie and the Follow team. I'm a Follow ambassador. For those of you who doesn't know, I think Morgan will be also talking more about Follow. So I would like to introduce why we're doing in this format. Is because we have been to many other panels and I have seen that it's quite boring to have this really straightforward like monologue between panelists towards farmers. I'm farmers in my head all the time towards people. So I think it's nice to have this interactive discussion so we can listen to others and exchange more. I think this is meant for us to really learn from each other here. And I'm sure that you guys have much more to contribute as well. So yeah, like first I would like to start with a small introduction with all of us so that you can guys understand where we come from, why we're here, and the work we're all doing towards boosting soil health and enhancing regenerative agriculture practices with our own work. So today here we have Owen from Nestle, and he will be introducing himself shortly. But also Barbara from Rabobank Carbon Bank, as well as Morgan from Food and Land Use Coalition, the FOLU, as well as Mahi from Caring, as well as Juliana from Partnerships of Forests. So I would like to ask you, let's start with the ladies first. Juliana, can you share with us a bit of the work you're doing with Partnership for Forests in Brazil, Latin America especially, but also like what you're doing to boost regenerative agriculture and maybe give one example.
Is it working? Oh, it's working. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Felipe, for this invitation. I'm Juliana. I come from Brazil. Can you all listen to me now? Okay, thank you. Speak close. Okay. And I'm here to represent Partnerships for Forests. I'm not a real producer myself, but I talk to producers all the time, so I feel a little bit entitled to speak a bit about it. Partnerships for Forests is a UK-funded program that operates across the tropical belt, supporting initiatives with a market-based approach. And those initiatives that will have impact on either reducing deforestation or promoting forest restoration. And a lot of that links to the discussion on regenerative agriculture, specifically and more especially in countries in Latin America where agriculture is very linked to land use conversion and deforestation in itself. So we have had a portfolio of about 35 projects supported in Latin America. Some of them are still active. One of them that I would like to share as an example here is the work we've been doing in the southeast of Pará, in the Brazilian Amazon. The southeast of Pará is a hotspot of deforestation in that region, it has been very strongly converted into pasture land, which also means it's a high conflict zone in the Amazon as well. And for some years now, the Nature Conservancy, which is the NGO that started this work before we joined, have gathered multiple smallholder producers in that area that would traditionally work with cattle to support them in transforming and restoring pasture land into agroforestry systems, having cocoa as the main commodity in the arrangement. And what we have then did, Partnerships for Forests entered this arrangement to support in bringing the private sector, the value chain along. So today we work with Mondelez, which is the chocolate industry. We work with OFI, with Olam trader, the main trader in the region for the cocoa beans. We work with the local cooperatives. We work with technical assistance. We've created a hub for technical assistance for those rural producers, and also working with them to allow them to access credit in the Brazilian bank. So it's a multi-dimension project with different components, but I guess the main message of this is bring the private sector on board, have a multi-stakeholder approach, and how to actually engage those farmers into a sustained vision of shifting from a non-regenerative deforestation activity to a regenerative perspective. Thank you, Felipe.
Perfect. Thank you, Juliana. The Partnership for Forests is doing incredible work also, even with Vigia, also the sneakers in Brazil with rubber, and it has a huge potential, the work they're doing to really drive solutions for deforestation areas towards regenerative practices. And I'll let Marie introduce herself and share a bit of the work you're doing with caring and regenerative. I know Johan is working really hard in your team to boost regenerative practices, so please.
So first, good morning, everyone, and very happy to be with you. So caring, perhaps to introduce in few words, it's a luxury company. It's a worldwide company, and we have brands like Gucci, Saint Laurent, Boucheron, to name only a few. So for us, the first thing when we are speaking about regenerative agriculture, it's very key because the big majority of our raw materials are coming directly for nature. If you think about wool, silk, cotton, or also leather. The second thing, it's about inspiration. If you look to our ready-to-wear, it's a kind of inspiration for our designers. So that's why also we think you have a specific responsibility. And after, before going into details, as luxury company, even with the volume, we don't represent so big volume, we set the trends. So we think because we have this power to set the trend, we have this specific duty really to act. So to come back to regenerative agriculture, we decided now 2 years ago to transform 1 million hectares from conventional agriculture to regenerative agriculture. Of course, in link with our supply chain. So our projects are linked with silk, cotton, cashmere, and leather. They are around the world because we have 7 projects in 6 countries. And our target is really in 2 years to be able to use this raw material. So, of course, we are working closely with the farmers. After, one thing that you have to keep in mind, which is I will say, a difficulty. As company, we don't buy directly the raw materials. We are not a food company. So we have also to put in place all the supply chain. So really to work with our direct supplier where we have contracts to ask them, please, can you buy the raw material from this farmer, this country? So you see, it's very, I will say, far away from the contract. So it's really to put in place a specific supply chain. That's why also, and perhaps we will have the time to come back about it, we think that cooperation is key. And we put in place to do that a specific fund that we call Caring for Nature, where we would like to have also other companies to be able to join us, because we think that if we want to put at scale with the right speed, we have to really work about collaboration, cooperation. So if there is some companies in the room, please join us.
Perfect. Thank you, Marie. Caring is one of the few corporates we see, large ones, that is really putting a fund towards regenerative agriculture. The Caring Fund was launched last year?
No, at the IUCN Congress,
Yep.
and it's 5 million until 2025.
Yeah. So you see, this is a role model for us to see how corporates can also build on financial schemes for supporting farmers in their own supply chain in the transition as well. So thank you, Marie, for sharing with us. Morgan, would you like to share with us the work you're doing with Follow and how you're and also the World Resource Institute, so that we can understand the work you're pushing towards regenerative agriculture and soil health?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning, and I love the new format. I'm also a bit paneled out. My name is Morgan Gillespie. I'm the Executive Director of the Food and Land Use Coalition. If you don't know about FOLU, we are a coalition in the truest sense of the word. We have 9 global partners, including the World Resources Institute, the World Farmers Organization, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, AGRA, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, GAIN, EAT, and others. But we also operate in 6 countries. So we have 6 country platforms that are coalitions in their own right. And in those coalitions, well, what FOLU seeks to do, obviously maybe by the title, is to transform food and land use systems. And our framework for action is grounded in these 10 critical transitions that we believe are necessary to aid that transformation. One of those critical transitions is to scale productive and regenerative agriculture. And you'll notice the very important word productive at the start of that. And we have projects on the ground in 3 countries where we are trying to do just that. Our FOLU Colombia platform has built a network of regenerators, of regenerative farmers, to share best practice and knowledge from the ground up. And then we have a link project in our platforms in Ethiopia and in India, where we're trying to share best practices and learnings across the 2 countries. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about today is some of the challenges and opportunities that we're seeing. So when some of these projects were getting started, one of the first challenges we came across is that there is no globally agreed definition of regenerative agriculture. In fact, regenerative agriculture is quite contentious in many spaces. You have folks in the US who believe it's only about soil carbon sequestration, which seems quite narrow in my perspective. You have folks in Latin America and Colombia particularly who really believe in regeneration in the most holistic sense of the word possible. Regenerative societies, regenerative systems. How can we regenerate the world that we live in so that we we shift from being an extractive presence on this planet to being replenishing one. And then you have lots in between, right? And so as we were sort of facing these challenges, we recognized the need for some sort of framework that would enable clear, comprehensive, consistent collection of data so that practitioners, civil society, farmers, scientists could start to make more informed decisions about which practices would work in which contexts, supporting specific commodities that would result in agreed-upon outcomes. And so because of that, with that hypothesis in mind, I'm really thrilled to share that we launched yesterday a new platform called Regen 10. So the Regen 10 is a platform who's really looking to see if we can scale food production by a regenerative way, increase food production in a regenerative way by 50% by 2050. FOLU is one of the partners, along again with WBCSD, with IUCN, actually, with the World Farmers Organization, of course. And what we're really trying to do is to make this a farmer-centric movement so that farmers really are able to spark the conversations, recognize themselves as the economic actors within the food system, and take control of the decisions that they can make to help shift their own practices towards regenerative outcomes. One of the main things that the Regen 10 platform will do will be to create this framework, an outcomes-based framework. So to try to move away from the debate on, is it regenerative? Is it climate smart? Is it agroecological? Is it agroforestry? We are agnostic. We don't care. What we care about are environmental outcomes, which do include carbon, above and below ground soil carbon sequestration, soil health, but also includes freshwater security, improved water quality and quantity, biodiversity, and also importantly including social and livelihood indicators. So are these practices making farmers more prosperous? It's not just about yield improvements, it's about productivity and prosperity. Are farmers becoming more resilient to respond to the increasing climatic changes that we're seeing? And we're hopeful that having a framework that we are going to try to get global consensus on, fingers crossed, with farmers at the heart of it, will really enable practitioners and farmers around the world to, as I said, make more informed decisions based on best available data and science as to how these specific practices can lead towards outcomes that we're all in agreement on. So that's the work that FOLU is doing to support productive and regenerative agriculture. I'm really excited to have this conversation today. Thanks, Felipe.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Morgan. I have joined recently as a FOLU ambassador. I totally recommend you guys to look into FOLU, but also into Regen 10 that was launched yesterday. I think that they're doing incredible work that I think all of you can also play a role and contribute as well. So thank you. And here we have Barbara from Rabo Carbon Bank. Barbara, would you like to introduce yourself and share a bit with us the work the Rabo Carbon Bank is doing in regenerative space? We are collaborating in Brazil, in Mato Grosso state, where deforestation is very an issue. And we're building regenerative forestry business case together so that farmers can have access to carbon credits. And I'm talking about large farmers, like hundreds of thousands of hectares. So it's really amazing what Rabo Carbon Bank is doing, and I would love to hear more from you.
Thank you much, Felipe. My name is Barbara Baarsma. I work at the Rabobank, a financial institution. And you might think, what does a financial institution have to do with regenerative agriculture, with soil sequestration, with soil health? Well, quite a lot, because Rabobank is one of the largest food and ag banks in the world. So on the one hand, we have many farmers in our books, mostly large-scale farmers in Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, North America. And on the other hand, we have food corporates in our book. I'm very proud to say that Nestle is one of them. And we are not a listed company. We are a cooperative. So we believe very much, based on this DNA of being a cooperative, in cooperation. And what we do, we are right in the middle of the food supply chain, and we feel responsible for setting up all kinds of carbon-based, but actually broader than carbon, but we call it carbon. Why? Because the voluntary carbon market is the best developed market. So that's why we have the Rabo Carbon Bank. But actually it's much more also about nature, biodiversity. And that's why I'm so happy to be here at the Global Soil Health Day at this Food Pavilion. We celebrate that day. Later on we'll have a resolution on global health. And we hope that many member states will actually be a partner in that, endorse the resolution. And that's one of the things that Rabobank and Rabo Carbon Bank is doing, set up this movement of us working together with you, with everybody here at the COP, of making sure that agriculture becomes more sustainable, because that's in the end the goal. That's where we feel responsible. That's where we are uniquely positioned between those farmers and the food corporates, and where we can make a difference. How do we do that? Not with our financial balance sheet. Yeah, of course, that comes into play if finance or pre-finance is necessary. But most of the time, we work, if not most of the time, our balance is the global carbon balance. With, on the one hand, all of those emissions, over 51 billion ton of carbon dioxide equivalents emitted every year into the atmosphere. 30% comes from agriculture. So we need to do something first and foremost about reducing those emissions. So we have in our propositions one supply chain decarbonization solution, where we link food corporates to farmers and set up reduction projects on farm level with reduction units that can be traded along the supply chain to give the farmers the extra income they need to invest in their practices to become more sustainable. So that's this way, this way of the carbon balance. On the other side, once emitted, 60% remains in the atmosphere, 40% is absorbed back by natural carbon sinks. And that's the other part of the carbon balance, global carbon balance that we're working on. We're doing removal projects, remove from the atmosphere and sequester it in soils and forests. You already alluded to that. So both regenerative ag in soil sequestration, but also with forests and forestation projects in Brazil, avoidance of legal deforestation. And although smallholders are not part of our client base, we do have a project for especially aimed at smallholders. Max is here, he's working at that project. It's called Acorn, because we think that if you want to change the food system, if you want to make it more sustainable, you can't just work with large-scale farmers. You need to include smallholders, and that's why we also have this proposition. And we work together, being a cooperative, with many partners. Solidaridad is one of them. And together we have access also to those smallholders and try, as a Rabobank, as a large food and ag bank, to make a difference and to make agriculture more sustainable. But we need everyone here in this round discussion. How do you call it? Not a round table, because there's no table, but you made it very special environment to have a good discussion. I'm looking forward to that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barbara. You know what I really like about Rabobank carbon credits approach is that it serves not only large-scale farmers but also smallholder farmers. Max is here representing Acorn. We did like an agroforestry carbon credit program. The first one was smallholder farmers in Brazil, in the Amazon. So it's fantastic to see how we can enable farmers to get access to these carbon credits, which is so difficult for them to access. We're having like small plots of land. And you know, we are looking also with Rabobank to do insetting programs with corporates. Nespresso, one of Nestlé brands we work with in Brazil, they have 1,200 farmers with over 117,000 hectares, and they're aiming to inset their own emissions into their own coffee producers. And we're talking with Rabobank to think of like formats in which we can do insetting as well, because we see a lot of like large corporates with interest to do offsetting projects, planting trees, for example, in the Amazon to offset their emissions, but what's the real impact they have in your own supply chain? You know, so I think that's the true benefits of insetting, and I think we have a lot to continue further, and I would like to open for Owen to talk more about Nestlé work in regenerative agriculture space. So, floor is yours, Owen.
Sure, thank you, Felipe, and I think it's in danger of becoming a formal panel, so I'll try to be quick. So we can get some comments in from those here today. So I'm Owen, I work in our Global Public Affairs team at Nestlé, and I focus a lot on climate change and the interrelationship between that and biodiversity, nature and water. So really trying to bring all of those topics together in a more holistic way than we dealt with them in the past. We made a net zero commitment in 2019, and we didn't really know what to do when we made that commitment, so we started doing our homework and very quickly realized that the vast majority of our emissions come from our supply chain. We have quite significant and often complex supply chains in different parts of the world. Commodities like cocoa and coffee, palm oil, sugar, dairy, etc. Pretty much any of the big 14 commodities that you can think of will somehow be connected to Nestle in some way in our products. And then, we then started working on how do we reduce the carbon impact of the way those ingredients are grown. And regenerative agriculture really kind of emerged as an overarching concept. So over time, the detail has come on what does that mean. We've done a lot of engagement. We've done a lot of listening with farmers organizations, other stakeholders to try and build a bit more detail around that, to move from just a kind of idea to something a bit more concrete without going down the route of specifying everything. Because, we also need to be context specific and aware that it varies in terms of the sourcing area, the type of crop, and the type of conditions that we might be working in. Basic principles around soil health, around water, biodiversity, farmer income really drive our program. And we've got an objective to get to 20% of our key ingredients by 2025 coming from more regenerative sources and 50% by 2030. And that's about 14 million tons a year. So you can sort of start to scale up the impact in your own mind of what that means and the land area that could be affected. But despite that, our influence is still limited. And that's why we're kind of here at COP to help encourage the movement to build more companies to come on board, for there to be more of an understanding at the political level about the importance of regenerative agriculture, which we're not really seeing everywhere yet. I think that's still a journey to go on, and we're collaborating with others. We've got quite an important meeting coming up with the European Union, the Commission in December to talk about regen ag and where does that fit with their plans, and looking forward to collaborating more. Just to pick a couple of examples before I finish, we've got a great example in South Africa of a dairy farm which is hoping to reach net zero emissions by the end of next year. So really, really on the way already. And that's through sequestering more carbon in the soil, better use of things like manure management and herd management, and a demonstration that it works, and it works for the farmer there as well. And then we can share that through peer-to-peer networks and build up the interest and the momentum. And then I think the second example I'd use is from Côte d'Ivoire. So that's cocoa, unsurprisingly. And what we're doing there is integrating the social and the environmental factors together through a thing called the Income Accelerator Program. So that's rewarding farmers for practices that not only move in a more regenerative direction, but also help avoid some of the social issues that are occurring through a payment of a premium from Nestle to support long-term supply chain development. So I think key messages, we have scale, but we're not big enough on our own, and we need to integrate social, environmental factors and economic factors to make this a success. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Owen. It's really great to hear the work you're doing, and also the collaboration with Nespresso. It's a great example of many more. You also recently launched like a fund, or like a 2 billion investment, also in regenerative agriculture, right?
Yeah, so in 2020, we set out an intention to spend 1.2 billion Swiss francs by 2025 on regen ag, and what that mostly means is providing expertise and support for farmers at a premium for ingredients coming from those sources. So if we want to get to 20% by 2025, we need to help farmers with any impact on their income, with the yield gap, with expertise, etc. And then that funding and support will continue beyond 2025, and it will depend on the conditions that we see when we get to that point. And the curve is quite scary, because we have to keep accelerating every year to get to that 50%. So the funding is an important part of it, and working with the financial sector, I think, is going to be crucial to success.
Perfect. Thank you. My dad also shared like yesterday on WhatsApp like the message of the Nestle investment on regenerative agriculture. And my dad, working in banking, he was always like quite skeptic about the potential of regenerative, and seeing now like Nestle is also putting some funds towards this direction. We build more credibility and more trust for people to really start understanding the benefits for the economics of farmers as well in regenerative agriculture. So now open for questions, and I think actually I have a question to all of you, which is, why you're here and what would you like to discuss. Like, why did you came to this panel discussion, and how? What do we see? What do you feel like it's important to mention and for us to have a conversation here? So, would you like to start? Just before, Lucas is doing incredible work with Cycle to Farms. He came from the Netherlands by bike to Egypt. This guy is amazing. So he's visiting all regenerative farms on the way, together with Aisha, and this is really amazing. So Lucas.
Thank you, Felipe. Yeah, so we are cycling from farm to farm in the EU, the Middle East, and now we are going to East Africa. So we are visiting regenerative agriculture farmers, and I think quite often the question comes in: what the farmers needs to do to meet the private sector needs, right? Because now we can hear, your ambitions and goals, but sometimes they don't really reach the farmers on the ground. So I just would like to know, what are the action steps that the farmers should implement in their businesses?
Sure, thank you very much for the question. So I think it does depend a little bit on the relationship between Nestle and the supply chain. So in fresh milk, for example, we have a network of 500,000 farmers that we source from directly. So in that situation, we can communicate very much, with the farmer through our existing networks. So we have about 2,000 agronomists around the world who have built networks within various communities. And where we're sourcing directly, that's obviously a little bit more straightforward. The second way to do it is through our suppliers. So we have a range of suppliers. They're from very big companies who have a lot of influence to much smaller companies who we also need to engage. And I think the first thing to do in terms of impact is to engage those bigger companies who could spread the message, but not forget the others who maybe are less obvious, in terms of candidates for communication. So it's about engagement, communication, working with others in various different platforms, and encouraging all companies working in agriculture to try and get on the same page, right? And then that message will hopefully be a bit more consistent at the farm level eventually.
I think your question for a company like us, it's one of the major questions, to be sure that we are well aligned. Above all, I tell you that we don't buy directly the raw material. So, for example, in our program, we work also with Conservation International to be sure that we have people on the ground and really to explain in details concretely what we are expecting. So, in our case, for example, in luxury, it's not really linked with the technical criteria for the environmental side or social side, because I think thanks to CI, we have the good way to explain. One of the big challenges is about the quality. And now, nearly 6 years ago, we started a program in Mongolia to have cashmere, okay? And we have to explain and to go back quite often to be sure that we will have the right standard of quality, which is not obvious because the cashmere was great for, I will say, some brands, but not for the luxury products. And this side, linked with quality and to explain exactly, it takes really time. And sometimes it's quite difficult to be well aligned. So that's why we need really people on the ground to make a kind of translations.
I would like to make just a small comment to build on top of what you actually asked. Is maybe a second direct question to that will be, what can then be done so that the companies will listen more to the farmers? So they explain a bit how the message come across to the farmers, but how can we actually improve that dialogue so that, because there's so much going on the ground that can be shared and that can be developed in this two-way relationship.
And to build on that, this is kind of, sometimes people think it's the boring response, but it's a really structurally important response. Companies, MNCs in particular, have a lot of pressure to report against corporate reporting standards. There's the SBTI, there's the SBTN, there's the TCFD, there's the TNFD, there's the World Benchmarking Alliance, there's OP2B, there's the SCI platform. I mean, that's 7. But companies are increasingly under pressure to report, and the targets and the metrics that they need to report are increasingly going to be coming from the farm level. And so what we're starting to see today is a bunch of farmers being bombarded by requests from different companies, because farmers supply not just Nestle, they supply a bunch of different people. And that's why the standardized framework is so important, to shift the power balance so that the farmers are on the front foot saying, this is the data that we can supply. This is what we can report for you. And what we're doing as part of Region 10 is to translate those metrics into the existing corporate reporting frames. So metric X will support company-wise TCFD response. Metric A will support TNFD, company B's TNFD response. And part of that, why this is so critical, is not only to provide or start to collect a whole bunch of data, but to shift the power balance from the corporates to the farmers, to enable the farmers, as I said, to be on the front foot and be in control of what they provide to the companies, and to standardize to some degree. As I said, there's no globally agreed definition of what regeneration is. So what Nestle asks for might be different to what Unilever asks for, which is slightly different to what Danone asks for. But to get that standardized global agreement as to the outcomes we're all seeking to deliver, so that the requests become more consistent, more consolidated, to reduce the burden on the farmers themselves. And to Julia's point, to really enable the farmer's voice to be part of the conversation, to dictate to some degree what they can report against.
Well, actually, I fully echo that. By the way, being Dutch, like very much that you are actually on your bike. The Netherlands is a biking country. Really applaud that. Your question is so modest. What can farmers do to help corporates or private organizations? But actually, I would turn it around. What can those private organizations, also banks, do to help farmers? Because actually, those private organizations have set SBTI targets, have set pathways to Paris, so they need the farmers. And if you need farmers, you should unburden them. You should help them. And that's what we're at Rabo Carbon Bank trying to do, is to make a one-stop shop where the farmer is actually unburdened, where there is agronomic advice, you also have agronomic advisors, but where there is modeling, monitoring, everything has been taken care of. At least, not everything, of course, because the farmer still needs to change his practices or her practices. But it's much more the other way around. And I hope that that is actually happening today. So my question would be, are there any farmers here? Now, you are a farmer and you're a farmer. Well, okay, but we talk about farmers all day here at the Food Pavilion. And they need to be here. Yeah. And I'm not a farmer. I'm a banker. I'm an economist. But I don't want to talk about farmers. I want to enable them to make the transition. So they should be here to tell us what they need instead of the other way around. So I very much like your question, but it's very modest.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lucas, for your question. Anyone else has a... yeah. And then we can go to you because you have a question as well.
I love your comment. Thank you so much. It's just fascinating to learn what all of you are doing. And I love your comment about farmers being here. I'm a researcher at the University of Minnesota in the US, and I'm wondering how you engage with science and researchers. And I also, most of my research is with farms and on farm, and it's with really novel solutions to regenerative agriculture that are really hard to get other funding for. So I work on perennial grain crops. And so, for example, funding has just allowed for a perennial rice to be developed. A paper just came out on this 2 days ago, like a perennial rice. And so you have all the benefits of perennial systems, and you still produce grain that will feed people and pay farmers and all of these benefits. And I work on another perennial rice called Kernza, which is much more tiny that probably no one has heard of. but yeah, how do you think about the triangle of partnering with farmers and partnering with researchers? Because when we all kind of, and your work, because it seems like when we all co-create together, we can make really powerful solutions.
Can I react? Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. Science is really, really important when it comes to also giving the potential, so showing where the extra potential is, what practice can actually help to make the soil more healthy, to increase biodiversity, to increase water resilience, and yes, also to sequester or reduce carbon. The difficulty for me, at Rabo Carbon Bank, is that on the one hand we have quite strict frameworks that we need to work in, because we need to be able to prove that there's actually 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent sequestered. So we need to do all the modeling, we need to have all the data, we have to have the proof on the very highest level. And the science is still, that's science. I know, I'm a professor of economics also, so I know science is about doubts, science is about looking what will work, and that actually does not fit in this schedule where you don't want to have like cowboy credits. I can add double counting and greenwashing and so on. So yes, of course, we do need to come up with the proof, but then where can we do the scientific experiments and that still get the funds that you need? So I don't have the answer. But I simply say that yes, we do need your input. That's actually why the Wageningen University, I'm sorry, it's in the Netherlands, but it's quite huge when it comes to, you probably know them, is part of our network. And also Keith Bostian, for instance, you might know him from, okay. So that's just to answer the question.
Perfect,
Yeah,
thanks, Barbara.
and the breeding of like new crops even, yeah. Because I agree with you, the soil carbon, I'm a soil scientist, it's a mess. But there's a lot of other really good research in breeding and in agronomics and learning from farmers. Thank you.
No, just to add to what Barbara is saying, I think science plays like a gigantic role in every single type of agriculture. And, you know, like we're talking about all these different terms from agroecology to agroforestry to regenerative to syntropic, but in the end, what truly matters is the outcomes. And you can only measure success if you know what kind of increase you have on organic soil carbon, what kind of increase you have on biodiversity increase, on food security, on economic performance, and so forth. So measuring is key, and science and researchers are fundamental for us to really make sure that we have like co-benefits working with regenerative practices. I see that now there's this trend of true cost accounting, so we can start really measuring these outcomes to have a more concrete global standard where companies can base themselves in the coming future with the hidden costs of like nature and people impact. And science will play a bigger role, because you see most of the certifications right now is basically a very simple auditing, just going to the farm and checking that, making a checkbox of the practices. But in the end, is like the regenerative is really about context specific. So it's not a one size fits all. Like we need to understand the local context, and in order to do that, we need to measure outcomes. So I think that's why science has a really important role.
I think it's such a good question, and I'm going to take like a slightly meta answer, but I kind of want to remind everyone that 7 years ago businesses weren't at COPs. Like the private sector didn't exist at COPs. And we now have COPs where businesses are entirely prevalent because there's deep recognition that the private sector is absolutely part of the problem, but they're also part of the solution. There were probably not farmers at COP last year, but we know through WFO there's 150 farmers at this COP this year speaking, with their voices being heard, with many trying to amplify their voices. And that shift happened in just 7 years. Is it enough? Absolutely not. But I am very confident that in COP28, the farmers' voice will be even more elevated. There will be more farmers in the room. Now, when it comes to science similarly has been pretty top-down, right? It's Global North dictating research agendas. There's a shift in science as well. The 1CGR reform is really advocating this, that we need to listen to farmers and local contacts, and the farmers need to be saying, this is the research that needs to be done. These are the problems that need to be solved. And so the flow of information needs to be switched. Is it perfect? No, but that shift is happening, and so that we should see over time farmers asking for the research from the north or from the academic universities and the local context, and then getting that locally specific information. So as I said, it's not perfect, but we have to, I think, celebrate progress when progress is being made, and things are changing in a much more accelerated fashion. I also just want to flag that the next session is about producer-driven solutions for regenerative agriculture. There will be farmers, WFO will be in the room, and so we do recognize that. And so if you want to stick around, the next session will also continue this conversation.
Thank you, Morgan. So anyone else? You had a question, right? And then I go jump to you. Okay.
Hello, I'm Camila from Brazil. Do you know most part of deforestation, mainly Amazonia, is due to agribusiness. So I'd like to know if and what type of measures you are doing to guarantee that the food you're producing or the investments that you're doing does not to do anything related to deforestation. And specifically, I would like to know if you are adopting any traceability or transparency measure to guarantee that. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to answer that one, Felipe? Yeah. So yeah, deforestation absolutely critical for improving the food system, moving towards a regenerative food system, and also reducing carbon emissions. So we have got to a point where I think around 98% of our 5 key commodities, at-risk commodities, are verified deforestation-free. But that's the result of 12 years of hard work, of traceability, of defining origins, taking action where there may be contraventions of that policy, then extending that into commodities that are less directly at risk, such as coffee and cocoa. And by 2025, we want to get to 100% on those two as well. So it's absolutely a priority, and I think one of the things that we're trying to do is integrate insetting projects into sourcing landscapes. So that's actually going to go some way towards restoring some of that degraded land, some of that land that's been lost. For example, in coffee, which can be quite a monocrop type situation. If we start to plant trees within those sourcing landscapes, that can help to improve biodiversity and carbon capture as well. So I think it's moving from that more destructive extractive system to one that's more integrated and nature friendly, and I think we've made some progress, but we've still got a way to go, including in Brazil. Thank you.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks for your question, and I appreciate that we mentioned deforestation as well, part of the food systems. And so, just on after living 7 years in the Netherlands, I could learn how to be very Dutch to end now this panel. Otherwise, as a Brazilian, I would keep for much longer time. And so I really appreciate all of you who came here and contributed to this panel. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we can see each other throughout the day. And for those of you who is interested to stay and watch the coming panel, you're most welcome. So thank you so much for everyone, and I hope to see you soon.